and a gracious hello to you wherever you may be. I am your host, Mike Hingson, and you are listening to Unstoppable Mindset. Today we get to have a voice actor person, Bill Ratner, who, you want to know who Bill Ratner is? Go back and watch the old G.I. Joe cartoons and listen to the voice of Flint.
All right, Lady J, you better get your battle gear on because Cobra's on their way and I can't bring up the laser thread weapon system. We got to get out of here. Yo, Joe.
There you go. I rest my case. Well, Bill, welcome to Unstoppable Mindset.
We can't rest now, Michael. We've just begun.
No, we've just begun. We got to keep going here. Well, I'm really glad that you're here. Bill is another person who we inveigled to get on Unstoppable Mindset with the help of Walden Hughes. And so that means we can talk about Walden all we want today, Bill. Just saying.
Oh, my goodness. And I got a lot to say, let me tell you.
Perfect. Bring it on. We are really grateful to Walden. Although I hope he's not listening. We don't want to give him a big head, but no, seriously, we're really grateful
He has
for
a
Walden.
big head, Michael.
Good
That's
point.
the thing, but his posture, oddly enough, is perfect.
Well, there you go. What do you do? He practiced. Well, anyway, we're glad you're here. Tell us about the early Bill, growing up and all that stuff. It's always fun to
Oh,
start at the
goodness
beginning.
gracious. Well, I was a very lucky little boy. I was born in Des Moines, Iowa in 1947 to two lovely people, professionals, both with master's degree out of University of Chicago. My mother was a social worker. My father had an MBA in business. He was managing editor of Better Homes and Gardens magazine. So I had the joy of living in a better home and living in a garden.
There you are.
My
And
mother, I think,
how long were you in Des Moines?
5.5 years, left
Okay.
before my sixth birthday. My dad got a fancy job at an ad agency in Minneapolis
Ah,
and had a big brother named Pete and a big, handsome, curly-haired boy with green eyes, and moved to Minneapolis, Minnesota, and was brought up there.
wow. So you went to school there and chased the girls and all that stuff.
I went to school there at Blake School for Boys in Hopkins, Minnesota.
Couldn't chase the
Private
girls.
day school, but the girls we were allowed to dance with, certainly not chase, Michael, was at Woodhue Dancing School. The Northrop girls from Northrop Girls School and the Blake boys were put together in eighth grade and taught the cha-cha-cha, the waltz, the Charleston, and we danced together. And the girls wore white gloves, and we sniffed their perfume, and we all learned how to be lovers when we were 45.
There you are.
Mm-hmm.
Well, as long as you learned at some point, that's a good start.
It's a weird generation, Michael.
I've been to Des Moines before. I was born in Chicago, but moved out to California when I was 5. But I did some work with the National Federation of the Blind in the mid 1970s, 1976 into 1978. So spent time at the Iowa Commission for the Blind in Des Moines, which became a top agency for the blind in, well, the late 50s into the 60s and so on.
So both my parents are from Chicago. My father from the south side of Chicago, 44th and Kedzie, which was a Irish, Polish, Italian, Jewish, Ukrainian neighborhood. And my mother from Glencoe, which was a middle-class suburb above Northwestern University in Evanston. Where were you born? Where were you born?
57th and Union.
North.
South side. No, south.
South side. 57th and Union. Is that west of Kedzie?
You know, I don't remember the geography well enough to know, but I know that it was, I think Mount Sinai Hospital where I was born. But it's a pretty tough neighborhood today, so I understand.
Yeah. It was tough then. It's tough now.
Yeah, I think it's tougher supposedly than it was, but we lived there for 5 years and then we moved to California. And I remember some things about Chicago. I remember walking down to the local candy store most days and had no problem doing that. my parents were told they should shut me away in a home somewhere because no blind child could ever grow up to amount to anything. And my parents said, "You guys are you're totally wrong," and they brought me up with
Who,
that attitude. So
who said that? The school said that?
doctors when they
Doctor
discovered I was
said
blind.
put the kid. Goodness gracious, my mother was
Hmm.
horrified. My
Well,
dears.
my parents said absolutely not, and they brought me up. And they actually worked with other parents of premature kids who became blind. And when kindergarten started for us in the age of 4, they actually had a special kindergarten class for blind kids at the Perry School, which is where I went. And so I did that for a year, learned Braille and some other things. Then we moved to California. But yeah, and I go back to Chicago every so often. And when I do nowadays, one of my favorite places to migrate in Chicago is Garrett Popcorn.
Ah, yes, with caramel corn and
Yep,
regular corn
the
and their
Chicago blend, which is a
cheese
mixture.
corn. Yeah.
Yep, the Chicago blend is cheese corn. Well, as it is with caramel corn, and they put other mozzarella on it as well. It's really good. Mm, yeah,
So
I
we're on
miss
the air, Michael.
we,
What do you call your program? Here I am, your new friend, and I can't even announce your program because I don't know the name.
unstoppable mindset.
This is Unstoppable Mindset.
There
We'll be
you
back
are.
after this. We're back.
Well, we're back already. We're fast. So, you moved off elsewhere, out of Des Moines and all that. And where did you go to college?
Well, this is like
Or did
talking.
you?
This is a bit like talking about the Vietnam War. Looking back on my college career is like looking back on the Vietnam War.
Ah,
A series of delusions and defeats. Um, by the time was
happens.
applying for college, by the time I was applying for college, I was an orphan, a middle class
Ah,
orphan, having been born to fabulous parents who died too young of natural causes.
ah,
So my grades in high school were mediocre. I couldn't get into the Ivy Leagues. I got into the Big Ten schools. My stepmother said, "You're going to Michigan State in East Lansing because your cousin Eddie became a successful realtor." And Michigan State was known as Moo U. It was the most
yeah.
successful, the largest agriculture college and university in the country. Kids from South Asia, China, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, South America, all over the world came to Michigan State to study agricultural sciences. Children of rich farmers all over the world and middle class farmers all over the world. And a huge police science department. Part of the
Mm,
campus was fenced off, and the young cadets, 18, 19, 20 years old, would practice on the rest of the student body, uniformed with hats. And, all right, excuse me, young man, we're just going to get some pizza. It's 8 o'clock on Friday night. Stand against your car, hands in your car. I said, "Are you guys practicing again? Shut up and spread your legs." So that was Michigan State.
oh gosh.
And even though both my parents had master's degrees, I just found all the diversions available in the 1960s to be
Hmm.
way too interesting, and was not invited to return after my sophomore year. And in order to flunk out of a Big Ten university, and they're fine universities, all of them, you have to be either really determined or not so smart, not really capable of doing that level of study
Mm.
in undergraduate school. And I'd like to think that I was determined. I used to show up for my exams with a little blue book, and the only thing I would write is, "Due to lack of knowledge, I am unable to complete this exam." Signed, Bill Ratner.
There you
And
go.
get up early and hand it in and go off. And so what was left for a young man like that was the theater. I'd seen the great Zero Mostel when I was 14 years old,
Mm.
and on stage live, he looked just like my father, and he was funny. And if I were a rich man, diddle 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 diddle, and that's the great Zero Mostel.
Yeah.
And it took about it took about 6, 7 years to percolate inside my my brain. In high school, I didn't want to do theater. The the cheerleaders and guys who didn't happen to be friends with were doing theater. I took my girlfriends to see plays, but when I was 21, I started acting, and I've been an actor ever since. I'm a committee chair on the Screen Actors Guild in Hollywood and Screen Actors Guild AFTRA, and work as a voice actor and collect my pensions, and God bless the union.
Well, hey, as long as it works and you're making progress, you're still with it, right?
That's the point. There's no accounting for taste in my business, Michael. Work for a few different broadcast entities at my age, and it's younger people. It's 18 to 34, 18 years to 34 years old is the ideal demographic for advertisers, for Ford Motor Company, Dove soap, Betty Crocker cake mixes and cereals, every conceivable product that's sold online or sold on television and radio. This is my meat. And I don't work for religion, however. If a religious organization calls, I call and say I'm not qualified. I don't have my divinity degree in order to sell your church to the public.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can understand that. But you obviously do a lot, and as we talked about, you were Flint in GI Joe, which is kind of cool.
Flint and G.I. Joe was very cool. Hasbro Corporation, which was based in Providence, Rhode Island,
Mm-hmm.
had a huge success with G.I. Joe, the figure. The figure was about 11 and a half inches tall, like a Barbie, like a
Right.
male Barbie. And was introduced to the public after the Korean War. There is a comic book that was also published about G.I. Joe. He was an individual figure. He was a figure, sort of mythic cartoon figure during World War II. G.I.
Mm-hmm.
Joe, a generic American soldier, fighting man. And but the Vietnam War dragged on for a long time, and the American buying public who were buying kids' toys got tired of G.I. Joe, got tired of a military figure in their household, and stopped buying. And when Nixon ended the Vietnam War, or allowed it to finish in 1974, Hasbro was in the tank. Its stock was cheap, and executives were getting nervous. And then came the great George Lucas in Star Wars, who shrank all these action figures down from 11 and a half inches to 3.5 inches, and went to China and had Chinese game and toy makers make Star Wars toys, and began to earn billions and billions of dollars. And so Hasbro said, let's turn G.I. Joe into a team. And the team began with Flint and Lady J and Scarlet and Duke and Destro and Cobra Commander, and grew to 85 different characters because Hasbro and the toy maker partners could create 85 different sets of toys and action figures. And so I was an actor in this show and had a good time, and also a purveyor of $1 billion industry of American toys. And the good news about these toys is I was at a conference where we sign autographs to voice actors, and we have supper with fans and so on. And I was sitting next to a 30-year-old kid and his parents. And this kid was so knowledgeable about pop culture and every conceivable children's show and animated show that had ever been on the screen or on television. I turned to his mother and, sort of being a wiseacre, said, "So, ma'am, how do you feel about your 30-year-old still playing with G.I. Joe action figures?" And she said, "Well, he and I both teach English in the Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania school system. And last year, the literacy level of my ninth graders was 50%. 50% of those kids could not read in ninth grade. So I asked the principal if I could borrow my son's G.I. Joe action figures, comic books, and VHS tapes, recordings of the shows from TV. And he said, sure, whatever you want to try." And so she did. and she played the videotapes. And these kids were thrilled. They'd never seen a G.I. Joe cartoon in class before. Passed out the comic books, let them read comics. And then she said, okay, you guys, and passed out notebooks and pens and pencils and said, I want you guys to make up some shows, some G.I. Joe shows. And so they said, yeah, we're ready. All right, Cobra, you better get into the barber shop because the Barber Bill's no longer there and the fire engines are in the way. And wait a minute, there's a dog in the street. And so they're making this up, using their imagination, doing their schoolwork by coming up with scenarios, imaginary fan fiction for G.I. Joe. And she raised the literacy level in her classroom by 50% that year, by the end of that year. So that was the only story that I've ever heard about the sort of the efficacy of G.I. Joe, other than, kids play with them. Are they shooting each other all the time? I certainly hope not.
I hope not.
Are they using the action figures? Do they strip their guns off and put them in a little, stub over by the side and have them do physical battle with each other, or have them hump the woods, or have them climb the stairs, or have them search the trees? Who knows what kids do? Same with girls and Barbies. Barbie has been a source of fun and creativity for lots of girls, and a source of worry and bother to a lot of parents as well.
Well, at the same time, though, when kids start to react and relate to some of these things, it's pretty cool. I mean, look what's happened with the whole Harry Potter movement and craze. Harry Potter has probably done more in the last 20 or 25 years to promote reading for kids than most anything else.
And that's because it's such a good series of books. I read them to my daughters.
Yeah.
And the quality of writing, she was a brilliant writer.
Mm-hmm.
Not only just the stories and the storytelling, which is fun to watch in the movies. And, it's great for a parent to read. If there are any parents listening, I don't care how old your kids are. I don't care if they're 15. Offer to read to them. The 15-year-old might, of course, say, Mom. But anybody younger than that might say either, all right, fine, which means you better do it, or read a book to me? Sure. It's fun for the parent, fun for the kid, and it makes the child a completely different kind of thinker and worker and earner.
Well, also the people who they got to read the books for the recordings, Stephen Fry and in the U.S. here, Jim Dale, did such an incredible job as well. I've read the whole Harry Potter series more than once because I just enjoy them, and I enjoy listening to the voices. They do such a good job.
Yeah.
And of course, for me, one of the interesting stories that I know about Jim Dale reading Harry Potter was, since it was published by Scholastic, he was actually scheduled to do a reading from from the new Harry Potter book that was coming out in 2001. On September 11th, he was going to be at Scholastic reading, and of course, that didn't happen because of everything that did occur. So I don't know whether I'm assuming at some point a little bit later he did, but still he was scheduled to be there and read. But they've done so much to help promote reading, and a lot of those kinds of cartoons and so on have done some of that, which is pretty good. So it's good to to see that continue to happen. Well, so you've written several books on poetry and so on, and I know that you've mentioned more than once grief and loss. How come those words keep coming up?
Well, I had an unusual childhood. Again, I mentioned earlier what a lucky kid I was. My parents were happy, educated, good people, not abusers. I don't have horror stories to tell about my mother or my father until my mother grew sick with breast cancer, and it took about a year and a half or 2 years to die when I was 7 years old. The good news is, because she was a sensitive, educated social worker, as she was actually dying, she arranged a death counseling session with me and my older brother. And the Unitarian minister, who was also a death counselor, and whom she was seeing to talk about, what it was like to be dying of breast cancer with two young kids. And at this session, which sort of surprised me, I was second grade, came home from school. In the living room was my mother and my brother, looking a little nervous, and Dr. Carl Storm from the Unitarian Church. And she said, "You know Dr. Storm from church, but he's also my therapist, and we talk about my illness and how I feel, and we talk about how much I love you boys, and talk about how I worry about daddy, and this is what one does when one is in crisis." And that
Mm-hmm.
was a moment that was not traumatic for me. It's a moment I've recalled hundreds of times,
Mm-hmm.
um, and one that has been a guiding light through my life. My mother's death was very difficult for my older brother, who was 13, who grew up in World War II without my father. It was just him and my mother when he was off in the Pacific fighting in World War II. And then I was born after the war. And the loss of a mother in a family is like the bottom dropping out of a family.
Mm-hmm.
But luckily, my dad met a woman he worked with, a highly placed advertising executive, which was unusual for a female in the 1950s. And she became our stepmother a year later. And we had some very lovely, warm family years with her extended family and our extended family and all of us together until my brother got sick,
Mm.
came down with kidney disease a couple of years before kidney dialysis was invented and a couple of years before kidney transplants were done.
Mm-hmm.
Died at 19, had
Mm.
been the captain of the swimming team at our high school, but did a year in college out in California and died on Halloween of 1960. My father was 51 years old. His eldest son had died. He had lost his wife 6 years earlier. He was working too hard in the advertising industry, successful man, and dropped dead of a heart attack a week
Mm.
before my 14th birthday.
Gosh.
Yeah, I found him unconscious on the floor of our master bathroom in our house. So my life changed. My life has taught me many, many things. It's taught me how the defense system works in trauma. It's taught me the resilience of a child. It's taught me the kindness of strangers. It's taught me the sadness of loss.
Well, you seem to come through all of it pretty well.
Well, thank you.
Well, there you go.
Is there a question behind that
No,
statement?
it's just an observation, but you do seem to obviously cope with all of it and do pretty well. So you've always liked to be involved in acting and so on. How did you actually end up deciding to be a voice actor?
Well, my dad, after he was managing editor of Better Homes and Gardens magazine in Des Moines for Meredith Publishing, got offered a fancy job as executive vice president of the flour and mix division for Campbell Methuen Advertising, and later General Mills Corporation, Betty Crocker brand, and would bring me to work all the time and would sit with me and we'd watch the wonderful old westerns that were on primetime television, Rawhide and Gunsmoke and The Virginian. And during the
Cheyenne and
commercials,
all those, yeah.
yeah, during the commercials, my father would make fun of the commercials. Oh, look at that guy. And number one, son, that's lousy acting. Number two, listen to that copy. It's the dumbest ad copy I've ever seen. And then he would sing the jingles and then he would say, no, that's a good commercial right there. And he wasn't always negative. He was just a good critic of advertising. So at a very young age, starting, when we watched television, I think the first television he bought us when I was 5 years old, I was around one of the most educated, active, funny, animated television critics I could hope to have in my life as a 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12-year-old. And so when I was 12, I became one of the founding members of the Brotherhood of Radio Stations with my friends John Waterhouse and John Barstow and Steve Gray and Bill Connors in South Minneapolis. I named my 5-watt night kit AM transmitter after my sixth grade teacher, Bob Close.
Mm.
This is WCLO, stereo radio. And when I was in sixth grade, I built myself a switch box, and I had a turntable, and I had an intercom, and I wired my house for sound, as did all the other boys in the BORS, and that's Brotherhood of Radio Stations. And we were guests on each other's shows, and we were obsessed. And we would go to the shopping malls whenever a local DJ was making an appearance, and torture him and ask him dumb questions, and listen obsessively to American AM radio. And at the time, for AM radio, not FM like today or internet, on your little radio tuner, all the big old grandma and grandpa radios, the wooden ones, were AM for amplitude
Right.
modulated. You could get stations at night once the sun went down, and the later it got, the ionosphere would lift and the AM radio signals would bounce higher and farther. And in Minneapolis at age 6 and 7, I was able to listen to stations out of Mexico and Texas and Chicago, and was absolutely fascinated with what was being put out. And I would switch. My brother, when I was about 8 years old, gave me a transistor radio, which I hid under my bed covers, and at night would turn on and listen for, who knows, hours at a time, and just tuning the dial from country to rock and roll to hit parade to news to commercials to agriculture reports to cow crossings in Kansas and grain harvesting and cheese making in Wisconsin, and on and on and on, that made up the great medium of radio that was handing its power and its business over to television just as I was growing as a child. Fascinating transition.
Mm. And well, but as it was transitioning, how did that affect you?
It made television the romantic, exciting, dynamic medium. It made radio seem a little limited and antiquated. And although I listened for environment and wasn't able to drag a television set under my covers at night,
Yeah.
and television became memorable with everything from actual World War II battle footage being shown because there wasn't enough programming, to 1930s Warner Brothers gangster movies with James Cagney.
Edward G. Robinson, and yeah.
Yeah, to all the sitcoms, Leave It to Beaver, and television cartoons, and on and on and on. And the most memorable elements to me were the personalities, and some of whom were invisible. When I was 5 years old, I was watching a kids program after school, after kindergarten. We'll be back with more funny puppets and marionettes after this message. And the first words that came on from an invisible voice, with this deep baritone voice, this commercial message will be 60 seconds long. Chrysler and Dodge for 1954, blah, 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 blah. And I watched hypnotized as a 1953 Dodge drove across the screen with a happy family of 4 waving out the window. And at the end of the commercial, I ran into the kitchen and said, Mom, I know what a minute is. And it had suddenly come into my brain in one of those very rare and memorable moments in a person's life, where your brain actually speaks to you in its own private language and says, here is something very new and very true, that 60 seconds is in fact a minute. And when someone says, see you in 5 minutes, they mean 5 times that? 5 times as long as that Chrysler commercial, 5 times 60. That's 300 seconds. And she said, did you learn that in kindergarten? And I said, no, I learned it from Kangaroo Bob on TV, his announcer. Oh, Kangaroo Bob. I said, no, but this guy was invisible. And so at 5 years of age, I was aware of the existence of, the practice of, the sound of, the magic of, the seemingly unlimited access to facts, figures, products, brand names that these voices had and would say on the air in this sort of majestic, patriarchal way.
Hmm. And just think, 20 years later, then you had James Earl Jones.
The great James Earl Jones' father was a star on stage at that time, the 1950s. James Earl Jones came of age in the 60s and became a
Hmm.
Broadway and off-Broadway star.
I
And
got
then
to see him in Othello. He was playing Othello. What a powerful performance it was.
wonderful performer, yeah. Yeah, I got to see him as Big Daddy in Cat on a Hot Tin Roof,
Ah,
live and in person. Got front row seats for me and my family.
yeah, we weren't in the front row, but we saw it. We saw it on Broadway.
The
Um,
closest I ever got to James Earl Jones, he and I had the same voiceover agent, a woman named Rita Venari of Sutton Barth and Venari Company. And I came into the agency to audition for Doritos, and I hear this magnificent voice coming from behind a closed door
mm.
voiceover booth, saying with a Spanish accent, Doritos, Doritos.
Ah,
And I thought, that's James Earl Jones. Why is he saying Doritos? And he came out and he bowed to me, nodded and smiled, and I said hello. And the agent brought me in the booth and shut the door. And she said, and I said, that was James Earl Jones. What a voice! What she said, oh, he's such a nice man. And she said, but I couldn't. I was too embarrassed. I was too afraid to stop him from saying Doritos. And it turns out
ah,
he didn't get the gig. Some other voice actor got it because he didn't say. Had he said Doritos,
Doritos. Yeah.
but the agent froze up. That was as close as I ever got to
Did you get the
start.
gig?
Oh goodness, no.
No, you didn't, huh? Oh well. Well, yeah. I mean, it was wonderful. It was James Earl Jones and Christopher Plummer played Iago.
Oh goodness.
Oh, I know. What a combination. Well, um, so you you did a lot of voiceover stuff. What did you do regarding radio moving forward, or did you just go completely out of that and you were in TV, or did you have any opportunities
Well,
to do
for
radio?
me to go back um, at age 15, my brother and father, who were big supporters of my radio, my dad would read my WCLO newsletter and he'd initial it, excellent journalism, son. And my brother would bring his teenage friends up, play the Everly Brothers, man. You got an Elvis record? And I did, and you know they were big supporters for me as a 13-year-old. But when I turned 14 and I had lost my brother and my father, I lost my enthusiasm and put all of my radio equipment in a box, intended to play with it later, never, ever, ever did again. And when I was about 30 years old, and I'd done years of acting in the theater, having a great time doing fun plays in small theaters in Minneapolis and South Dakota and Oakland, California, and San Francisco. Um, I needed money, so I looked in the want ads and saw a job for telephone sales. And I thought, well, I used to love the telephone. I used to make phony phone calls to people all the time. Used to call funeral homes. Hi, Carson Funeral. May I help you? Yes, I'm calling to tell you that you have a dark green slate tiled roof. Isn't that correct? Yes. Well, there's a corpse on your roof, lady. For goodness sake, bring it down. And we'd laugh and we'd record it, and so I thought, well, gee, I used to have a lot of fun with the phone, and so I called the number of telephone sales and got hired to sell magazine subscriptions and dinner tickets to union dinners and all
Hmm.
kinds of things. And then I saw a new job at a radio station, a suburban radio station out in Walnut Creek, California, a lovely Metro BART train ride
Mm.
away where I lived
Hmm.
in East Bay. And so I got on the BART train, rode out there, and walked in for the interview, and was told I was going to be selling small advertising packages on radio for the station on the phone. And so I called barber shops and beauty shops and gas stations in the area. And one guy picked up the phone and said, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Are you on the radio right now? And I said, no, I'm in the sales room. Well, maybe you should be. And he slams the phone on me. He didn't want to talk to me anymore. He wasn't interested in buying advertising. I thought,
Yeah.
gee. And I told somebody at the station, and they said, well, do you want to be on the radio? And he went, yeah, I was on the radio when I was 13. And it just so happened that an older fellow was retiring from the 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. slot
Oh,
at KKIS, KKIS 99 and KDFM, Pittsburgh, California. And it was a beautiful music station. It was a Muzak station. Remember,
yeah.
people old enough will remember music that used to play in elevators that was like violin music. The Percy Faith Orchestra playing a Rolling Stones song here in the elevator for you.
Yes.
Well, that's exactly what we played. And it would have been harder to get a job at the local rock stations because, you know, they were popular places. And so I applied for the job, and
You would have lost your voice a lot sooner, and it would have been a lot harder if you had had to do Wolfman Jack, but that's another story.
yeah, I used to listen to Wolfman Jack.
I hear
Worked
you.
worked in his studio in Hollywood. He became a studio owner.
KHJ.
Yeah, yeah, big time.
Anyway, so you got to work at the Muzak station.
Got to work at a music station, and uh, I was moving to Los Angeles to go to a bigger market to attempt to penetrate a bigger broadcast market. And one of the sales guys, a very nice guy named Ralph Pizzella, said, well, when you get to LA, you should study with a friend of mine, Don DiPietro. He teaches voiceovers. I said, what are voiceovers? He said, you know that CVS pharmacy commercial?
Oh,
It just carted up and did 75 tags. Available in San Fernando, available in San Clemente, available in Los Angeles, available in Pasadena. And I said, yeah. He said, well, you didn't get paid any extra. You got paid your $165 a week. The guy who did that commercial for the ad agency got paid probably $300 plus extra for the tags. That's voiceovers. And I thought, why, there's an idea.
what a concept.
So he gave me the name and number of an old friend, acquaintance of his who he'd known in radio, named Don DiPietro, alias Johnny Rabbit, who'd worked for the Dick Clark organization in St.
Hmm.
Louis, at a big rock and roll station there. He'd come to LA, was doing voiceovers and teaching voiceover classes in a little second story storefront out of the San Fernando Valley in Los Angeles. So I signed up for his class. And he was an experienced guy, and he liked me, and we all had fun. And I realized I was beginning to study like an actor at 18 who goes to New York or goes to Los Angeles or Chicago or Atlanta or St. Louis to act in the big theaters and starts acting classes and realizes, oh my goodness, these people are truly professionals. I
Hmm.
don't know how to do what they do. And so for 6 years, I took voiceover classes probably 40, 50 nights a year. And from disc jockeys, from ex-show hosts, from actors, from animated cartoon voices, and put enough time in to get a degree in neurology in medical school. And worked my way up in radio in Los Angeles and had a morning show, a lovely show with a wonderful newsman named Phil Reed. And we talked about things and reviewed movies and played a lot of music. And then I realized, wait a minute, I'm earning 3 times the money in voiceovers as I am on the radio, and I have to get up at 4:30 in the morning to be on the radio. And a wonderful guy who was Johnny Carson's staff announcer, named Jack Angel, said, "You're not still on radio, are you?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I'm working in the morning at K-Big." "Get out of there, man! Quit!" And I thought, well, how can I quit? I've always wanted to be a radio announcer. And then there was another wonderful guy on the old AM station KMPC here,
Hmm.
Sweet Dick Whittington.
Whittington, right.
And he said at a seminar that I went to at a union voiceover training class, when you wake up at 4 in the morning and you swing your legs over the bed and your shoes hit the floor and you put your head in your hands and you say to yourself, I don't want to do this anymore, that's when you quit radio. And I thought, well, that hadn't happened to me. I was just getting up early to write some comedy segments and on and on and on. And then I was driving around town all day doing auditions and rented an ex-girlfriend's second bedroom so that I could nap by myself during the day when I had an hour in
Mm.
Hollywood. And as I would fall asleep, I'd picture myself every single day. I'm in a dark voiceover studio. A microphone is before me. A music stand is before the microphone. And on it is a piece of paper with advertising copy on it. On the other side of the large piece of glass of the recording booth are three individuals, my employers. I begin to read, and somehow the text leaps off the page, streams into my eyes, letter for letter, word for word, into a part of my back brain that I don't understand and can't describe. It is processed in my semi-conscious mind with the help of voiceover training and hope and faith, and comes out my mouth, goes into the microphone, is recorded in the digital recorder. And those three men, like little monkeys, lean forward and say, "Wow, how'd he do that?" That was my daily creative visualization, Michael. That was my daily fantasy. And I had learned that from Dale Carnegie, and I had learned that from Olympic athletes on NBC TV in the 60s and 70s, when the announcer would say, "This young man you're seeing practicing his high jump is actually standing there. He's standing stationary. And the bouncing of the head is he's actually rehearsing in his mind, running and leaping over the 7 feet 2 inch bar and falling into the sawdust. And now he's doing it again." And you could just barely see the man nodding his head on camera at the exact rhythm that he would be running the 25 yards toward the high bar and leaping. And he raised his head up during the imaginary leap that he was visualizing. And then he actually jumped the 7 foot 2 inches. That's how I learned about creative visualization, from NBC Sports on TV.
Channel 4 in Los Angeles.
There you go.
Well, so you broke into voiceover, and that's what you did.
That's what I did, darn it. And I ain't stopping now. There's a wonderful old actor named Bill Irwin. There are two Bill Irwins. One is a younger actor in his 50s or 60s, a brilliant actor from Broadway to film and TV. There's an older William Irwin, also named Bill Irwin, who's probably in his 90s now. And I went to a premiere of a film, and he was always showing up in these films as the senile stockbroker who answers the phone upside down, or the senile board member who always asks inappropriate questions. And I went up to him and I said, "I see you in everything, man. I'm 85 years old, and some friends and associates of mine tell me I should slow down. I only got cast in movies and TV when I was 65. I ain't slowing down. If I tried to slow down at 85, I'd have to stop." And that's my philosophy. My hero is the great Don Pardo, the late great Don Pardo, who was the editor for Saturday Night Live.
And Jeopardy!
Saturday Night Live, starring Bill Murray, Gilda Radner. And he died
Jeopardy! Before that.
Yeah. Died at 92. With I picture him, whether it's true this or not, probably not, with a microphone in his hand, in his soundproof booth in his garage, and I believe he lived in Arizona, although the show was aired and taped in New York.
New York, right.
Where he worked for decades as a successful announcer. So that's the story, Michael.
Well, and I miss, very frankly, some of the days of radio back in the 60s and 70s and so on. We had in LA, you mentioned Dick Whittington, Dick Whittinghill on KMPC, Gary Owens, so many people who were such wonderful announcers and doing some wonderful things. And radio just isn't the same anymore. Same kind of personality is gone.
It's gone to TikTok and YouTube. And the truth is, I'm not going to whine about TikTok or YouTube, because some of the most creative moments on camera are being done on TikTok and YouTube by young, quote, influencers who hire themselves out to advertisers everything from lipstick. And then, when I went to a party last night, it was just wild. And but this makeup, look, watch me apply this lip remover and blah 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 blah. Now I have no lips. Um, these are the people with the voices. These are the new voices, and of course the faces. And so I would really advise before people who in fact use the internet. If you use the internet, you can't complain. If you use the internet, if you go to Facebook or Instagram, or you get to collect your email or Google this or that, which most of us do, it's handy. You can't complain about TikTok. You can't complain about TikTok or YouTube because it's what the younger generation is
Yeah.
using. And it's what the younger generation advertisers and advertising executives and creators and musicians and actors are using to parade before us, as Gary Owens did, as Marlon Brando did, as Sarah Bernhardt did in the 19th
Right.
century. So it's all as you do, Michael. You're a parader. You're at the head of the parade. You've been on your own float for years. I read your bio. I don't even know why you want to waste a minute talking to me, for goodness sake.
The one thing about podcasts that I like over radio, and I did radio at KUCI for 7 years when I was in school. What I really like about podcasts is they're not, and this is also would be true for TikTok and YouTube, and primarily TikTok, I would say. Um, it isn't as structured. So if we don't finish in 60 minutes and we finish in 61 minutes, no one's going to shoot us.
Well,
Which is,
I beg to differ with you. Now I'm going to start a fight with you, Michael. Yeah, we need conflict in this script.
is that it?
The TikTok is very structured. 60,
No, no, no. I understand that. I'm talking about podcasts, though.
right,
The
yeah, podcast.
podcast like
Yeah,
mine.
but there's a problem. We got to tone it up. We got to pick it up. There's a lot and I listen to what are otherwise really bright, wonderful personalities on screen,
Hmm.
celebrities who have podcasts. And they just sit in the car,
They're boring.
changing
Yeah.
my socks. And then I had meatballs for dinner. And you know what my wife said? Why? And there's just too much of that. And
Oh,
so,
I understand. Yeah. I mean, it's like anything, but I'm just saying that's one of the reasons I love podcasting. So it's my way of continuing what I used to do in radio and having a lot of fun doing it.
all right,
This
let me ask you a technical and editorial question. Let me ask you an artistic question.
an
Can you
artistic
edit
question.
can you edit this podcast?
Yeah.
Do you plan to?
Nope. I think conversations are conversations, but there is
Oh,
a,
but I mean, there have been starts and stops, and I answer a question, and there's a long pause, and then,
yeah, we can edit.
do you edit that stuff out?
We do edit some of that out, and I have somebody that does a lot of it because I'm doing more podcasts and also I travel and speak. But I can edit. There's a program called Reaper, which is really a very sophisticated digital
Does it
audio.
close up spaces?
You can close up spaces with it, yes. But the neat thing about Reaper is that somebody has written scripts to make it incredibly accessible for blind people using screen readers.
What does it
So
do? What does it do? Give me the elevator pitch.
Um, you've seen some of the programs that people use, like computer vision and other things, to do editing of videos and so on.
Yeah, yeah. Even the Apple edit. What is it called? What's it? Apple?
GarageBand,
No, that's audio. What's the
that's
Apple?
audio.
Yeah,
Oh, I know what you mean.
QuickTime is I think.
QuickTime.
Yeah,
But whether it's video or audio, the point is that Reaper allows me to do all of that. I can edit audio, I can insert, I can remove pauses. I can do anything with Reaper that anyone else can do editing audio because it's been made completely accessible.
that's great. That's good. That's nice
Oh,
to
it
hear.
is. It's cool.
Good, good.
So if I want, I can edit this and just have my questions and then silence when you're talking.
That might be best. That
Yeah, you
might
never
be
know.
best. Ladies and gentlemen, here's Bill Ratner.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Now, you have won the Moth Stories Slam. What? Tell me about Moth Story Slam. You've won it nine
Well,
times.
the Moth was started by a writer, a novelist, who had lived in the South and moved to New York City. Successful novelist named George Dawes Green. And the inception of the Moth, which many people listening are familiar with from the Moth Radio Hour, it was, I believe, either late 90s or early 2000s when he'd been in New York for a while and was publishing as a fiction writer, and threw a party and decided, instead of going to one of these dumb, boring parties with the same drinks being served and same cigarettes being smoked out on the veranda and the same hors d'oeuvres, I'm going to ask people to bring a 5 minute story, a personal story of
Ooh.
any nature, a true story.
Hmm.
And you don't have to have one to get into the party, but I encourage you to. And so, the 30, 40, 50 people showed up, many of whom had stories. And they had a few drinks and they had hors d'oeuvres. And then he said, okay, ladies and gentlemen, take your seats. It's time for, and then he picked names out of a hat. And person after person after person stood up in a very unusual setting, which was almost never done at parties. How often do you see that happen?
Hmm.
Suddenly the room falls silent, and someone with permission, having been asked by the host to tell a personal story, some
Hmm.
funny, some tragic, some complex, some embarrassing, some racy, some wild, some action filled. And afterward, the feedback he got from his friends was, "This is the most amazing experience I've ever had,
Mm.
especially in my life." And someone said, "You need to do this." And he said, "Well, you people left a lot of cigarette butts and beer cans around my apartment." And they said, "Well, let's do it at a coffee shop. Let's do it at a church basement." So slowly but surely, the Moth storytelling, story slams, which were designed after the old poetry slams in the 50s and 60s, where
Hmm.
they were judged contests, like a dance contest. Everybody's familiar with dance contests. Well, then came poetry contests with people singing and saying and really energetically really reading their. Then came storytelling contests with people standing on a stage before a silent audience telling a hopefully interesting, riveting story, beginning, middle, end, in 5 minutes. And so a coffee house was found, a monthly calendar was set up, then came the internet. Then it was so popular, standing room only, that they had to open yet another and another. And today, some 20 years later, 20 some years later, from Austin, Texas to San Francisco, California to Minneapolis, Minnesota to New York City to Los Angeles, there are Moth story slams available online for you to schedule yourself to go live and in person at themoth.org, as in the moth with wings.
Hmm.
A friend of mine, I was in New York, he said, "You can't believe it. This writer guy, a writer friend of mine who I had read, kind of an avant-garde, strange, funny writer, was hosting something called The Moth in New York." And we were texting each other. I said, "Well, I want to go." The theme was show business. I was going to talk to my Uncle Bobby, who was the bellboy on I Love Lucy. I'll tell a story. And I texted him that day. He said, "Oh man, I'm so sorry. I had the date wrong. It's next week." And I went, "But next week I'm going to be back home." And so he said, "Well, I think there's a Moth in Los Angeles." So about 15 years ago, I searched it down and went to a small Korean barbecue that had a tiny little stage that originally was for Korean musicians. And it was now being used for everything from stand-up comedy to evenings of rock and roll to now Moth storytelling once a month. And I think the theme was first time. And so I got up and told a silly story and didn't win first prize. They have judges, volunteer judges, a table of three judges, scoring you like at a swim meet or a track meet or a gymnastics meet. So this is all sort of familiar territory for everybody, except it's storytelling and not
Yeah.
high jumping or pull-ups. And I kept going back. I was addicted to it. I would write a story and I'd memorize it and I'd show up and try to make it 4 minutes and 50 seconds. And try to make it sound like I was really telling a story and not reading from a script, and which I wasn't because I would
Hmm.
throw the script away and I knew the stories well enough. And then they created a radio show, and then I began to win slams and compete in the Grand Slams. And then I started submitting these 750 word, 2.5 page stories to literary magazines, got a few published, and found a whole new way to spend my time and not make much money.
And then you went into poetry.
Then I got so bored with my prose writing that I took a poetry course from a wonderful guy in LA called Jack Grapes, who had been an actor and a football player and come to Hollywood and did some TV episodics and some episodic TV, and taught poetry. Was a poet in the schools, and I took his class of adults and got a poem published and thought, wait a minute, these aren't even 750 words. They're like 75 words. I mean, you could write a 10,000 word poem if you want, but
Some people have.
yeah, and it was complex, and there was so much to read and so much to learn and so much that was interesting and odd. And a daughter of a friend of mine who's a poet said, "Mommy, are you going to read me one of those little word movies before I go to sleep?" A little word movie
Word movie.
out of the mouths of babes.
Yeah.
And and I perform. Last night I was in Orange County at an organization called Ugly Mug Cafe, and a bunch of us poets read from an anthology that was published, and we sold our books and heard other young poets who were absolutely marvelous. And it's not for everybody, but it's one of the things I do.
Well, you sent me pictures of book covers, so they're going to be in the show notes, and I hope people will go out and get them.
Cool. Um,
Yeah.
one of the things that I did with poetry, in addition to wanting to get published and wanting to read before people, is wanting to see if there was a way, because poetry was very satisfying emotionally to me, intellectually very challenging and satisfying at times, and emotionally challenging and very satisfying at times. Writing about things personal, writing about nature, writing about friends, writing about stories. That I received some training from the National Association for Poetry Therapy.
Mm.
Poetry therapy is being used like art therapy,
Right. Right.
and have conducted some sessions and participated in many, and ended up working with eighth graders, kids who had lost someone to death in the past year of their lives. This is before COVID,
Hmm.
in the public schools in Los Angeles. And so there's a lot of that kind of work that is being done by conscionable people, by writers, by poets, by playwrights,
Well,
by
and you
musicians.
became a grief counselor.
Yes. And don't do that full time because I do voiceovers full time.
Right.
Write poetry. I'm am an active grandparent, but I do the occasional poetry session around grief poetry.
So you're a grandparent, so you've had kids and all that.
Yes, sir.
Well, is your wife still with us?
Yes.
Oh, great.
Yeah. She's an artist and an art educator.
Well, so the two of you can criticize each other's works then.
we're
Just saying. Just saying.
actually we're actually pretty kind to each other.
Yeah,
And we have a lot of outside criticism, so we
yeah, you
don't
don't need to do it internally.
fortunately we don't rely on it. What do you think of this? More than occasionally, each of us will say, "What do you think of this poem, honey?" Or "What do you think of this painting, honey?" And the favorite thing that my wife says that always thrills me and makes me very happy to be with her is I'll come down and she's beginning a new piece of art for an exhibition somewhere. And I'll say, "What? Tell me about what's going on with that." And she'll go, "I have no idea, but it'll tell me what to do."
Yeah. It's like a lot of authors talk about the fact that their characters write the stories,
Right.
which makes a lot of sense. So with all that you've done, are you writing a memoir by any chance?
I am writing a memoir, and writing a
Good for
memoir
you.
has been interesting. I've been doing it for many years. I got It was my graduate thesis from University of California, Riverside, Palm Desert.
Hmm. My
And
wife was a UC Riverside graduate.
oh my. Well, they have a low residency program where you go for 10 days in January, 10 days in June. The rest of it's online, which a lot of universities are doing low residency programs for people who work. And I got an MFA in creative writing, nonfiction. Had a book called Parenting for the Digital Age, The Truth About Media's Effect on Children. And was halfway through it. The publisher liked it, but they said you got to double the length. So I went
Huh.
back to school to try to figure out how to double the length, and was able to do it. And uh, decided to move on to personal memoir and personal storytelling, such as goes on at the Moth, but a little more personal than that. I
Yeah.
realized that some of the material that I was reading in the memoir section of a bookstore was very, very personal and was very helpful to read about people who've gone through particular issues in their childhood. Mine not being physical abuse or sexual abuse,
Hmm.
mine being death and loss, which
Yeah.
is different.
Yeah.
And uh, so
Hmm.
that became a focus of my graduate thesis. And many people were urging me to write a memoir. Someone said, you need to do a one-man show. So I entered the Hollywood Fringe and did a one-man show and got good reviews and had a good time and did another one-man show the next year and so on. So, but writing memoir, as anybody knows, and there are probably listeners who are either taking memoir courses online or who may be actively writing memoirs or short memoir pieces, as everybody knows, it can put you through moods
Hmm.
from absolutely ecstatic, oh my gosh, I got this done, I got this story told, and someone liked it, to oh my gosh, I'm so depressed, I don't understand why. Oh, wait a minute, I was writing about such and such today.
Yeah.
So that's the challenge for the memoirist, for the personal storyteller. It's also, and it's much more of a challenge than it is for the reader, unless it's bad writing and the reader can't stand that. But for me as a reader, I'm fascinated by people's difficult stories if they're well told.
Well, I know that when in 2002 I was advised to write a book about the World Trade Center experiences and all. And it took 8 years to kind of pull it all together. And then I met a woman who actually I collaborated with, Susie Flory, and we wrote Thunderdog. And her agent became my agent, who loved the proposal that we sent and actually got a contract within a week. So Thunderdog came out in 2011, was a New York Times bestseller, and I'm very blessed by that. And we're working toward the day that it will become a movie still, but it'll happen. And then I wrote a children's version of it. Well, not a children's version of the book, but a children's book about me growing up and Roselle growing up, the guide dog who was with me in the World Trade Center. And that's been on Amazon. We self published it. Then last year, we published a new book called Live Like a Guide Dog, which is all about controlling fear and teaching people lessons that I learned prior to September 11th that helped me focus and remain calm. Because I
What
realized
happened? What happened to you on September 11th?
I was in the World Trade Center. I worked on the 78th floor of Tower One.
And what happened? I
I
mean, I
got
know
out.
what happened, but what happened to you?
Um, Nothing that day. I mean, well, I got out. Um,
How did you get out?
Down the stairs. That was the only way to go. So the real story is not doing it, but why it worked. And the real issue is that I spent a lot of time when I first went into the World Trade Center learning all I could about what to do in an emergency, talking to police, port authority, security people, emergency preparedness people, and also just walking around the World Trade Center and learning the whole place because I ran an office for a company. And I wasn't going to rely on someone else to like lead me around if we were going to go to lunch somewhere and take people out before we'd negotiated contracts. So I needed to know all of that. And I learned all I could, also realizing that if there ever was an emergency, I might be the only one in the office, or we would be in an area where people couldn't read the signs to know what to do anyway. And so I had to take the responsibility of learning all that, which I did. And then when the planes hit, 18 floors above us on the other side of the building, um, we had some guests in the office, got them out, and then another colleague who was in from our corporate office and I. And my guide dog, Roselle, went to the stairs and we started down and
Okay,
made it down.
what floor did the plane strike?
It struck in the north tower between floors 93 and 99, so I just say 96.
Okay, and you were 20 floors down,
78 floors, 78. So we were 18 floors below.
and at the moment of impact, what did you think?
Had no idea. We heard a muffled kind of explosion because the plane hit on the other side of the building 18 floors above us. There was no way to know what was going on.
Did
For
you feel? Did you feel?
Oh, the building literally tipped probably about 20 feet. It kept tipping, and then we actually said goodbye to each other, and then the building came back upright, and then we went,
Really,
then
you thought you were going to die?
David, my colleague who was with me, as I said, he was from our California office, and he was there to help with some seminars we were going to be doing. We actually were saying goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78 floor plunge to the street when the building stopped tipping and it came back.
Designed to do that by the
It
architect.
was designed to do that, which is the point. The point.
Goodness gracious! And then, did you know how to get to the stairway?
Oh, absolutely.
And did you do it with your friend
Yeah. The
and your
first thing
guide?
we did, the first thing we did is I got him to get. We had some guests, and I said, "Get him to the stairs. Don't let him take the elevators," because I knew he had seen fire above us. Um, but that's all we knew. But I said, "Don't take the elevators. Don't let them take elevators. Get him to the stairs, and then come back, and we'll leave." So he did all that, and then he came back, and we went to the stairs and started down.
Wow! Could you smell anything?
We smelled burning jet fuel fumes on the way down, and that's how we figured out an airplane must have hit the building, but we had no idea what happened. We didn't know
Right.
what happened the until both towers had collapsed. And I actually talked to my wife, and she's the one who told us how two aircraft had been crashed into the towers, one into the Pentagon, and a fourth at that time was still missing over Pennsylvania.
Wow!
So you'll have to go pick up a copy of Thunderdog.
Goodness, good. Thunder Dog.
The name of the book is Thunderdog. And then the
Nice.
book I wrote last year is called Live Like a Guide Dog. It's lessons I learned from 8 guide dogs and my wife's service dog that helped me learn how to control fear. So Thunder Dog and Live Like a Guide Dog, they're both available wherever books are sold. And Running with Roselle, which is the kids' book, is also available. But yeah, you'll have to get those.
Cool, man.
So are you in September going to go up and be with the Reps cast
Yes, I
doing
am. It was a young woman named Linda Behrman who was
yes.
one of my voiceover agents many years ago at Sutton Barth was a wonderful agent and emailed me. We hadn't spoken in years. I'd moved on to another agency, and she said, "Hey, are you interested in doing old radio plays?" And I said, "Yeah, I was a founding actor of Milt Larson's
Mm,
Variety Arts Radio Theater in Los Angeles."
there
Milt
you go.
Larson was the guy who
Magic
started Magic
Castle.
Castle, and he
Right.
also at the same time started Variety Arts Radio Theater in the wonderful old 1920s Variety Arts building in downtown Los Angeles. And every week, Roger Rittner, director, would
Yeah.
stage these wonderful old golden age radio plays, and I was one of the actors. And so when she said, "Well, we'll let Walden Hughes know that you're available," and ended up, I've gone up twice now
Yeah.
for two
I saw
different
you up
years.
there. And
And yeah,
I
it's
I
just
was
great,
gonna be
great
I was
fun.
gonna be there this time, but I've got a speaking engagement, so I won't be able to be there. But the next time I go, I will be playing Richard Diamond in Richard Diamond Private Detective.
Oh, wonderful,
I'm gonna be Dick
fantastic.
Powell. That'll be fun.
Well, yeah, you've got a great voice for it.
I think
It's
it'll be
great fun. I
cute.
mean, as a voice actor, to do well-written scripts, dramatic
Yeah.
scripts, it's a whole different thing from doing a hot dog commercial.
Right. But the other part about it is that too many people never listen to the old original shows to really get a flavor for what the characters were, and they don't learn how to do the acting that they need to do. And one of the things I know Reps wants to do over time is to teach people how to be better radio actors so that they can help recreate these shows a lot better than they do today.
Yeah, I think actors, of course, trained actors, college actors, high school actors, college actors, young actors in the theater in whatever town you're in, are going to do a better job than the average
Yeah.
bear
Yeah.
listening to the script. But because acting is acting. But yeah, the old stuff was really great fun and exciting. And there's part of me that if I could live another life, I might like to be born in how about 1915 and try to get a job in radio then with all the marvelous
There you go.
radio
Yeah.
drama, Orson Welles, uh,
Jack Benny,
you know,
Bob Hope,
yeah, yeah,
Bill, Jack,
endless,
all those people.
yeah.
Well, this has been fun, and I think we'll have to stop because I have a dog that's hungry and I don't want to be his dinner, so I'm going to have to go feed him.
I'd hate for
No,
that.
he's a good dog, but I've really enjoyed being able to be here with you and do this, and I hope you have as well. And we really appreciate all of you listening out there. If people want to reach out to you in any way, how can they do that?
I can just go on my website, billratner.com.
BILLRADNER,
Ratner, R-A-T, like the
RAT rather, NER.com.
yeah.
Cool. There you go. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Wherever you're listening, we hope that you'll give us a 5-star rating on the podcast. If you'd like to reach out to me, because I'd love to hear what you think about our episode today, email me at michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's MICHAELHI at ACCESSIBE.com. And we'd love to hear from you, and both Bill, for you and all y'all out there listening. If you know anyone who ought to be a guest and tell us a story, please introduce us. We're always looking for more folks to come on the podcast. And by the way, Bill, Linda Berryman's going to be on at some point. I forget what day she's scheduled, but we've had a
Oh, she's
conversation.
terrific. She's a
Yeah,
wonderful storyteller, has had wonderful experiences in her life.
looking
Showbiz,
forward to it.
she's great.
Well, so once again, I want to thank you. This has been fun, and I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks, Michael. Send me a link. Want to tune in.